I never thought delivering a $20 jambalaya order would change my entire life. But here I am, 6 months later, wearing a white dress and looking at myself in the mirror of what used to be my worst nightmare and is now my greatest dream come true. If you've ever felt completely invisible, like you're just moving through the world without anyone really seeing you, then maybe you'll understand why what I'm about to tell you hit me like a freight train carrying 6 years of buried pain and unexpected joy. My name is Magnolia Delacour Santos, but everyone just calls me Maggie. I'm 24, I weigh about 260 pounds, and 6 months ago I lived in a faded yellow trailer in Riverside Gardens, which is basically the part of New Orleans where dreams come to die slowly, while jazz music plays in the distance. Don't get me wrong, there's beauty there too, in the way Mrs. Thibodeau grows her miracle tomatoes between the power lines, or how the smell of my mama's café con leche mixes with the morning mist rising off the Mississippi. But mostly, it was the kind of place where people like me end up when life decides to play a really cruel joke. I'd been delivering food for GrubDash for about 2 years, ever since I dropped out of community college because we couldn't afford the books anymore. It's not glamorous work, driving my beat-up Honda Civic through the Garden District and French Quarter, watching rich people in their beautiful houses order $40 meals while I survived on whatever was left over from my mama's cooking. But it paid enough to keep our lights on and buy mama's diabetes medication. So I didn't complain much. The thing about being a delivery driver when you look like me is that you become really good at being invisible. I'd perfected the art of handing over food bags without making eye contact, of saying "have a nice evening" in a voice that didn't invite conversation, of disappearing back into my car before anyone had time to really look at me. It was safer that way. When you're a fat girl in a world that worships skinny, you learn that attention usually means pain. But that Tuesday night in October, when the sky was dumping rain like God was angry about something, I couldn't disappear. Fast enough, the order came in around 8 p.m., right when the storm was getting serious. Garden District mansion, tip promising to be decent. And I needed every dollar I could get because Mama's insulin had gone up again. The address led me down one of those streets where the houses look like they belong in fairy tales, all wrought iron balconies and gas lamps flickering through Spanish moss. Even in the rain, you could smell money in the air, mixed with magnolia blossoms and that peculiar New Orleans scent of old secrets and older wealth. Number 47 was this gorgeous Creole mansion, painted cream with forest green shutters, sitting behind a gate that probably cost more than my car. The kind of place where I usually left food at the gate and texted that it was delivered, but the instructions specifically said to bring it to the front door. As I grabbed the order, 2 bags of what smelled like expensive Creole fusion from some upscale place in the quarter, the rain started coming down even harder. I pulled my hood up and made a run for it, my shoes squelching through puddles that reflected the warm light spilling from the mansion's windows. The front steps were slick with rain and covered in fallen leaves, and I was concentrating so hard on not slipping that I didn't notice the door opening until I was already stumbling forward. That's when it happened. My foot caught on the edge of a loose flagstone, and I went down hard, the food bags flying out of my hands and exploding everywhere. Red beans and rice, crawfish, etouffee, and what looked like blackened redfish scattered across the white marble steps like some kind of expensive modern art disaster. And there, standing in the doorway looking down at me and my spectacular failure, was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. At least, that's what I thought for exactly 3 seconds, until the porch light hit his face properly, and my entire world tilted sideways. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders filling out an expensive white button-down shirt. His hair was dark and perfectly styled. His skin had that golden tan that comes from sailing or tennis rather than working outside. and his jaw could have been carved by Michelangelo. Everything about him screamed money and privilege and a life so far removed from mine that we might as well have been different species. But his eyes, God, his eyes were the exact same shade of warm honey brown that used to make my teenage heart skip beats. Eyes that used to look at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. Eyes that belonged to someone I thought I'd never see again. "Oh, hell," he whispered, and his voice was deeper now, more mature, but still carried that slight Creole accent that used to make me melt. "Maggie Pearl." Nobody had called me Maggie Pearl in 6 years. Nobody except him. I sat there in the rain, covered in $20 worth of ruined food, staring up at Sebastian Beauregard like I was seeing a ghost. Which, in a way, I was. The last time I'd seen him, we were both 18 and he was screaming at me never to contact him again while his mother stood behind him calling me a murderer. Now here he was, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread about successful young entrepreneurs. And I was exactly what I'd always been afraid of becoming. The fat girl who couldn't even deliver food without making a mess of everything. Sebastian. I managed to whisper, and saying his name out loud after all these years felt like touching a live wire. He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost, his face going completely pale despite his tan. For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain kept falling, soaking through my grubdash hoodie and making the ruined food on the steps look even more pathetic. But we just stared at each other across 6 years of silence and hurt. If you've ever run into someone from your past who knew you when you were a completely different person, then you know that feeling in your stomach, like everything inside you is falling and you can't catch it. That's what this was, except multiplied by about 1,000, because this wasn't just anyone from my past. This was the boy I'd loved with every fiber of my being. The boy whose heart I'd helped break. The boy who'd broken mine right back. He stepped forward, and I realized he was about to help me up, but I scrambled to my feet before he could touch me. If he touched me, I was pretty sure I would completely fall apart right there on his fancy steps. "I'm so sorry," I said, bending down to try to clean up the mess I'd made. "I'll pay for the food. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to... I was babbling, my hands shaking as I tried to scoop rice back into the torn bags, and I could feel tears mixing with the rain on my face. "Maggie, stop," he said, and the gentleness in his voice almost destroyed me. "Just... stop. Come inside. You're soaking wet." "I can't," I said, without looking up at him. "I have to clean this up. I have to pay for the food. I have to..." "You don't have to do anything," he said. And suddenly he was crouching down next to me, his expensive shoes getting ruined in the puddles. "Please, just come inside for a minute. Let me get you a towel." I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away as fast as I could, to pretend this never happened. To go back to my safe little invisible life where the past stayed buried where it belonged. But something in his voice, some echo of the boy who used to beg me not to leave after our dates, made me look up at him. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Something between wonder and pain, and something else that made my chest tight. "I can't believe it's really you," he said quietly. "I've been looking for you for so long." That's when I started crying for real. Not just the few tears that had mixed with the rain, but actual sobbing that came from somewhere deep in my chest, where I'd locked away every feeling I'd ever had about Sebastian Beauregard. Because hearing him say he'd been looking for me, when I'd spent 6 years believing he hated me, when I'd convinced myself that forgetting me was probably the best thing he'd ever done, was more than my carefully constructed walls could handle. Like, if you've ever had someone from your past completely upend your world in a single moment, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, forgiveness, and second chances. He helped me up then, his hand warm and steady on my elbow, and guided me toward his front door. "Just for a few minutes," he said, "until the rain stops." I should have said no. I should have gotten in my car and driven back to my trailer and pretended this never happened. But I was 24 years old, and I hadn't felt truly seen by another person in so long that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. And Sebastian was looking at me the way he used to look at me when we were 17, like I was worth looking at, like I mattered, so I followed him inside. His house was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd clearly done very well for himself. High ceilings with crown molding, furniture that probably cost more than I made in a year, artwork on the walls that looked like it belonged in museums. But it was warm too, lived in, with books stacked on side tables and what looked like family photos scattered around. It smelled like coffee and something expensive and clean, nothing like the mix of fried food and industrial cleaner that always seemed to follow me around. He disappeared for a moment and came back with a thick white towel that was probably worth more than my entire outfit. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "There's a bathroom right down the hall if you want to. Or you can just..." I took the towel gratefully and pressed it to my face, buying myself a few seconds to try to pull myself together. When I lowered it, he was still staring at me with that same unreadable expression. "Maggie Pearl," he said again, like he was testing the words. "I can't believe you're here, in my house, after all this time." "I can't believe you live here," I said, because I had to say something, and that seemed safer than admitting I couldn't believe he was even talking to me. "This place is incredible." He looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "It's too big," he said. "I rattle around in here by myself most of the time. It was my grandmother's house. She left it to me when she passed last year. Grandmere Beauregard." I remembered her. A tiny woman with steel in her spine who'd always been kind to me when Sebastian brought me around for Sunday dinners. She used to slip me extra beignets and tell me stories about old New Orleans, while Sebastian helped his grandfather with yard work. The thought that she was gone hit me harder than it should have, considering I hadn't seen her in 6 years. "I'm sorry," I said. "She was a wonderful woman. She always liked you," he said, and there was something careful in his voice. "She asked about you sometimes, right up until the end." That made the tears start again, because Grandmere Beauregard asking about me meant that maybe, possibly, not everyone in his family had written me off as the girl who destroyed their lives. I pressed the towel to my eyes again. "Don't cry," Sebastian said softly. "Please don't cry." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm always crying these days. It's pathetic." "It's not pathetic," he said. "You're allowed to cry, especially ... after everything." Everything. That one word contained 6 years of pain and guilt and regret. 6 years of wondering what if, and if only, and why didn't I? Everything meant the night that changed both our lives forever. The night that turned us from high school sweethearts, planning our future together, into strangers who couldn't even look at each other. "I should go," I said, because talking about everything was dangerous territory, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for that. "My next delivery is probably waiting, and..." "You don't have any other deliveries," he said quietly. I looked at him in surprise. "How do you know that?" "Because I placed the order," he said. "I've been placing orders from different restaurants for months, hoping you'd be the one to deliver them. Tonight was the first time it worked." The towel fell from my hands. "What?" He ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up for the first time since I'd known him. "I found out you were working for Grubdash about 6 months ago. A friend of mine saw you making a delivery in the quarter and recognized you. I've been trying to ... I don't know, find a way to see you, to talk to you. I didn't know how else to ... You've been stalking me." The words came out harsher than I meant them to, but the idea that he'd been watching me, looking for me, while I'd been hiding from the world, was almost too much to process. "Not stalking," he said quickly. "Just ... hoping. I order food, I don't even eat, just hoping you'll be the one to bring it." Tonight was the first time in 6 months that it actually worked. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was telling me. Sebastian Beauregard, who could have any woman in New Orleans, who clearly had more money than he knew what to do with, had been ordering food he didn't want just for the chance to see me again. Me, the fat girl in the stained hoodie who couldn't even walk up his front steps without falling down. "Why?" I whispered. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that reminded me so much of the boy I'd loved that it physically hurt. "Because I never got to tell you that I'm sorry," he said. "Because I never got to tell you that none of it was your fault. Because I've spent 6 years trying to find a way to live with what my family did to you, and I can't. I can't live with it anymore." The rain was still pounding against the windows, creating a steady rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at water that might be deep enough to swim in, or shallow enough to break every bone in my body. "Sebastian," I said, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "What do you say to the person who was your whole world when you were 17? What do you say to the person whose little sister died because you decided to go to one more party, drink one more drink, stay out one more hour past curfew? I know you probably hate me," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I know you probably blame me for everything that happened, and you should. God knows I blame myself every day. But I need you to know that I never blamed you. Not once, not ever." That's when I really lost it, when the careful walls I'd built around my heart for the past 6 years came crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. Because I had blamed him. For months after the accident, I had blamed him for driving, for not seeing the drunk driver who ran the red light, for not protecting his little sister Celeste the way he'd always protected me. And then I'd blamed myself even more for blaming him, because how could I blame the person I loved for something that wasn't his fault? I was crying so hard I could barely breathe, making those ugly sobbing sounds that come from somewhere deep in your chest where all the pain lives. And Sebastian, sweet Sebastian, who'd always known exactly how to comfort me, stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me like no time had passed at all. He was bigger now, broader and stronger than he'd been at 18, but he still smelled like the same cologne mixed with something that was just essentially him. And I was bigger too, so much bigger that I was sure he'd notice, sure he'd be disgusted by the way I felt in his arms. But he just held me and let me cry, his hands stroking my hair the way he used to when I was stressed about tests or worried about my mama working too many double shifts. "I'm so sorry, Maggie Pearl," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry for all of it. For the accident, for my family, for not fighting harder to keep you. I'm sorry for all the years we lost." Subscribe if you've ever held someone who used to be your whole world and felt your heart remember what it was like to be complete. I don't know how long we stood there in his foyer, holding each other while the storm raged outside. It could have been minutes or hours. Time didn't seem to work the same way when I was in his arms. But eventually, my tears slowed down and I became aware that I was soaking his expensive shirt with my wet hoodie and probably getting mascara all over his shoulder. I tried to pull away, but he held on for a moment longer before letting me step back. "Better?" he asked, and his eyes were red-rimmed too. "I'm getting you all wet," I said, because focusing on practical things was easier than dealing with the emotional earthquake that was happening inside my chest. "I don't care," he said, and he meant it. "Maggie, we need to talk. Really talk about what happened. About everything." I nodded, because I knew he was right, even though the thought of rehashing that night made me feel sick. We'd never gotten to have that conversation. After the accident, after the funerals, after his mother had made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their lives. We'd just ... stopped. 6 years of silence. 6 years of questions that never got answered. That night, for the first time in 6 years, we talked. About everything. About the accident, about the guilt we'd both been carrying, about how his family had blamed me and how I'd blamed myself, and how we'd both been too young and too hurt to fight for what we had. We talked until the sun came up, sitting on his expensive couch with cups of coffee growing cold between us, finally saying all the things we should have said years ago. And then I told him about the baby. "There's something else," I said, because I knew I had to tell him now while I still had the courage. "Something you don't know about that night, about what happened after." He took my hand gently. "Tell me." I took a deep breath and tried to find the words for something I'd never said out loud to anyone except the doctor, who'd confirmed what I already knew. "I was pregnant," I said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. "The night of the accident, I was 6 weeks pregnant. With your baby." The color drained from his face so fast, I was afraid he might pass out. "What?" "I'd just found out that afternoon. I was going to tell you after the party, when we were alone. I had it all planned out, how I was going to tell you, what we were going to do. I was scared but also excited, because I knew you'd be happy. I knew you'd want to figure it out together." He was staring at me like I'd just told him the sky was falling, his mouth slightly open, his hand gone completely still in mine. "Pregnant," he repeated, like he was testing the word. "I lost the baby 3 days after the accident," I continued, because now that I'd started, I needed to get it all out before I lost my nerve. The stress, the grief, the trauma, it was all too much. I started bleeding the morning of Celeste's funeral, and by that night, it was over. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, processing what I'd told him, and I watched. About a dozen different emotions crossed his face. Shock, grief, anger, regret, and something that looked like devastation. "A baby," he whispered finally. "We lost a baby." "You didn't know," I said quickly. "I never got the chance to tell you, because after the accident, your family, they made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. And then, when I miscarried, I thought maybe it was for the best, because at least you wouldn't have to know about one more thing we lost that night." He pulled his hand away from mine and buried his face in his palms. "Jesus, Maggie, all these years, you've been carrying that alone." I told myself it was easier that way, that knowing would just make everything hurt worse for both of us. Easier. He looked up at me, and there were tears streaming down his face. "You think it would have been easier for me not to know that I lost a child that night? That you went through a miscarriage by yourself because my mother was too busy blaming you to let me be there for you?" I'd never seen him cry before. Not even at Celeste's funeral, when he'd stood stone-faced beside the casket while the rest of his family fell apart. But now he was sobbing, and I didn't know what to do with that level of raw emotion from someone who'd always been my rock. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching for him again. "I'm so sorry, Sebastian. I should have found a way to tell you. I should have fought harder to see you, to explain everything." "No," he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Don't apologize for protecting yourself. Don't apologize for surviving something that would have broken most people completely. I'm just God, Maggie. I'm so sorry you went through that alone. I'm sorry I wasn't there to hold your hand, or bring you soup, or just be there the way I should have been." We sat there crying together, probably making a spectacle of ourselves, but I didn't care. For the first time in 6 years, someone else knew the whole truth about what I'd lost that night. Someone else understood the full scope of the grief I'd been carrying around like a stone in my chest. "What would we have named the baby?" he asked, after we'd both gotten ourselves somewhat under control. The question surprised me, but I answered without hesitation. Celeste Marie if it was a girl. We'd talked about it before, remember? After your sister and my grandmother. And James Sebastian if it was a boy, he said, finishing the thought. I remember. I used to think about that sometimes. About what our baby would have looked like, what kind of personality they would have had, whether they would have gotten your athletic ability or my clumsiness. Probably both, he said with a watery smile. And your stubbornness and my terrible sense of direction. They would have been beautiful, I said. Just like their dad. That made him cry again, and honestly, it made me cry too. Because for just a moment, we were allowing ourselves to mourn not just the baby we'd lost, but the life we'd planned together, the family we'd dreamed about. All the might-have-beens that had died along with everything else that night. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other regularly. Coffee dates, long walks through the quarter, dinners at little places where nobody we knew would recognize us. It was like being 17 again, except we were both carrying the weight of adult responsibilities and the scars of everything we'd been through. But underneath all that, the connection we'd had was still there, maybe even stronger, because we'd both learned what it felt like to lose it. He told me about his business, how he'd started it 3 years ago with money his grandmother had left him, how he specialized in helping old New Orleans families modernize their operations without losing their character. He was good at it, he said, because he understood the tension between honoring tradition and embracing change. I told him about my dreams of becoming a journalist, how I'd always imagined writing stories that mattered, that helped people understand each other better. He listened like every word was important, asking questions about what kinds of stories I wanted to tell, encouraging me to think about going back to school, even though the idea terrified me. You're still brilliant, Maggie. Pearl, he said, one afternoon as we sat on a bench in Jackson Square, watching street performers entertain tourists. Your mind works in ways that amaze me. You see connections that other people miss. You understand people in ways that would make you an incredible journalist. I'm 24 and I deliver food for a living, I pointed out. I don't exactly have the credentials for journalism school. So you think credentials matter more than talent, more than passion? He turned to face me fully, his eyes intense in that way that had always made my stomach flutter. You could do anything you wanted to do, Maggie. You always could. The only thing stopping you is fear. He wasn't wrong, but it was easier to blame circumstances than to admit I was scared of trying and failing, scared of wanting something too much and having it taken away again. I'd gotten comfortable in my small life, safe behind my walls of low expectations and careful invisibility. What if I'm not good enough? I asked, voicing the fear that had been holding me back for years. What if you are? He countered. What if you're better than good enough? What if you're exactly what the world needs right now? The way he looked at me when he said things like that made me remember what it felt like to believe in myself, too. Think that maybe I was worth something more than just getting by. It was dangerous, that feeling. It made me want things I'd trained myself not to want. But it also made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. We were careful about where we met, sticking to places that were public but not too prominent. Places where we weren't likely to run into anyone from his social circle. I didn't ask why, but I could guess. Whatever his life looked like now, whoever else was in it, I probably didn't fit into it very neatly. And that was okay, I told myself. I was just grateful to have him back in any capacity. But 3 weeks after that first coffee date, everything changed. I was making a delivery to a high-end restaurant in the Garden District when I saw her. She was walking out of the restaurant with 2 other women, all of them dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread about Southern society. Tall, blonde, impossibly elegant, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my car. But it wasn't her appearance that made my blood run cold. It was the engagement ring on her left hand, a diamond so large it caught the afternoon light like a disco ball. And it was the way she was talking about her wedding plans, loud enough for half the street to hear. The florist is being absolutely impossible about the magnolias, she was saying in a voice that suggested she'd never been told no about anything in her entire life. I told her I wanted white magnolias for the ceremony because they're Sebastian's favorite, but apparently they're not in season. As if I care about seasons when I'm planning the wedding of the century. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the delivery bag heavy in my hands, listening to this perfect blonde goddess complain about flowers for her wedding to the man I'd been falling in love with all over again. "Victoria, darling, you could have pink roses and Sebastian wouldn't notice," one of her friends said. "Men never care about wedding details, as long as the bride looks beautiful, and you're going to be absolutely stunning." Victoria, Sterling Beauregard. According to the reservation I'd seen on the restaurant receipt, which meant she was already using his last name, already planning a life with him that I'd been naive enough to think might somehow include me. I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away before she noticed me, before I had to face the reality of what I'd been pretending wasn't true. But I was frozen, like a deer in headlights, watching my fairy tale crumble in real time. That's when she looked up and saw me standing there. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp with the kind of authority that comes from generations of privilege. "Are you the delivery girl? We've been waiting for our order." I looked down at the address on my receipt, then back up at her perfect face. Different restaurant, different order. She'd mistaken me for someone else, but the way she said delivery girl made it clear what she thought of people like me. "No," I managed to say. "I think you're waiting for someone else." She looked me up and down with undisguised disdain, taking in my grub-dash hoodie and my second-hand jeans and my hair that had been blown around by the wind. "Well, obviously," she said with a little laugh that made my cheeks burn. "I should have known. You don't look like you work for anywhere decent." Her friends giggled, and I felt about 2 inches tall. This was why I stayed invisible, why I didn't let myself want things that were out of my reach. This was why getting involved with Sebastian again had been a mistake from the very beginning. "Victoria Sterling," I said, because suddenly I needed her to know that I knew exactly who she was. "Congratulations on your engagement." The smile on her face faltered slightly. "Do I know you?" "No," I said, backing toward my car. "But I know Sebastian. We went to high school together." I didn't wait to see her reaction. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, because the look that had crossed her face when I mentioned Sebastian's name told me everything I needed to know. She didn't just know who I was. She knew exactly who I was, and she was not happy about it. That evening, I was still processing what I'd learned when there was a knock on our trailer door. Mama answered it, and I heard a familiar voice that made my blood run cold. "Good evening, Mrs. Santos. I'm Claudette Beauregard. I believe you remember me. I need to speak with your daughter." Mrs. Beauregard looked exactly the same as she had 6 years ago, perfectly put together in that way that only old money could achieve. Her silver hair was styled in the same elegant chignon. Her navy blue dress was undoubtedly designer, and her expression was just as cold as I remembered. "Mrs. Beauregard," I said, stepping outside to face her. "What are you doing here?" "I think you know why I'm here," she said. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Oh, I think there is." She stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of her expensive perfume, the same scent that used to make me feel welcome in her house when I was 17. Now it just made me nauseous. "My son has been seen around town with you. People are talking." "People always talk in this city," I said. "It doesn't mean anything. doesn't it?" Her smile was cold and sharp. "Because, from what I hear, you've been quite cozy with Sebastian lately. Coffee dates, long conversations, walks in the park. Almost like you think you can just waltz back into his life and pick up where you left off." "We're just friends," I said, even though the words felt like lies. "Friends," she repeated, and the skepticism in her voice was unmistakable. "Is that what you call it when a woman throws herself at an engaged man?" "I haven't thrown myself at anyone," I said, my anger finally overriding my fear. "And maybe if your son is so easily swayed, you should be having this conversation with him instead of me." Her eyes flashed with something dangerous. "How dare you? How dare I, what? Point out that your grown son is responsible for his own choices. That maybe if he's meeting with his ex-girlfriend, it's because he wants to." "My son is confused," she said firmly. "He's been through a difficult time lately with his grandmother's death and the pressure of the business. He's vulnerable to manipulation from people who want to take advantage of his good nature." "I'm not manipulating anyone," I said. "I never asked Sebastian to contact me. I never asked for any of this." "But you didn't discourage it either, did you?" She stepped even closer. "You let my grieving son believe that you might be interested in rekindling your little teenage romance, even though you know he's engaged to a wonderful woman who loves him. Does he love her?" The question came out before I could stop it. "Of course he loves her," she said, but there was a slight hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. "Victoria is perfect for him. She comes from a good family. She understands his responsibilities. She'll be an asset to his career and his standing in the community." "But does he love her?" I asked again. Mrs. Beauregard's composure cracked slightly. "Love is a luxury, Magnolia. Marriage is a partnership. Sebastian understands that, even if he's momentarily forgotten due to misplaced nostalgia. So he doesn't love her," I said. "What Sebastian feels or doesn't feel is irrelevant," she snapped. "He has obligations, commitments, a reputation to uphold, and he cannot do any of that if he's tangled up with someone like you, someone like me, fat, poor, working class, the kind of person who delivered food to their parties but never got invited to attend them. You need to stay away from him," she continued. "For his sake and for your own. Nothing good can come from this, and you know it. You've already destroyed this family once. Don't make the mistake of thinking we'll let you do it again." "I didn't destroy your family," I said, but my voice was shaking. "A drunk driver destroyed your family. You were the reason my daughter was in that car," she said coldly. "You were the reason they stayed out so late, the reason Sebastian was driving when he should have been home safe. You were the reason my baby girl died, and I will not let you take my son from me, too." I was crying now, the broken, exhausted tears of someone who'd been carrying guilt for too long. "Please," I whispered. "I never meant for any of that to happen. I loved Celeste too." "Love," she said with disgust. "You don't know what love is. If you loved my son, you'd leave him alone. And if I don't?" Her smile was cold and calculating. "Then you'll find out exactly how much power the Beauregard name still carries in this city. Your mother works for the Caldwell family, doesn't she? It would be a shame if they suddenly decided they no longer needed her services." The threat was clear. Mama's job with the Caldwells was our only steady income besides my delivery work. Without it, we'd lose everything. She got back in her Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing there, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything Mrs. Beauregard had said, about Victoria and her wedding plans, about the impossible situation I'd found myself in. I was in love with a man who was engaged to someone else. Someone perfect and wealthy and everything I could never be. Comment. If you've ever felt like you had to choose between your heart and your family's survival, the next morning I made a decision. I was going to see Sebastian one last time. I was going to tell him everything I'd learned and ask him to be honest with me about what he really wanted. Because I couldn't keep living in this limbo, couldn't keep hoping for something that might not even be real. I texted him asking if we could meet, and he suggested his house. When I arrived, he was waiting for me on the front porch, the same steps where we'd first reunited. But this time, his face was serious, troubled. "Maggie," he said as I walked up to him. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I said. "But I need to go first." He nodded and led me inside, where we sat on his couch like we had that first night. But the easy intimacy we'd developed over the past few weeks was gone, replaced by tension and unspoken truths. "I met your fiancée yesterday," I said without preamble. "Victoria Sterling Beauregard. She seems very invested in your wedding plans." His face went white. "Maggie, I can explain. Can you? Because I've been sitting here for weeks thinking. We were rebuilding something real, while you've been engaged to someone else the entire time. Was I just some kind of distraction? Some last hurrah before you settled down with the society princess?" "No," he said firmly. "God, no. Maggie, it's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Explain why you never mentioned that you're getting married. Explain why you've been leading me on while planning a life with someone else." He ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture I remembered from when we were teenagers. The engagement. "It's complicated." "How is an engagement complicated? You either want to marry her or you don't." "I don't," he said quietly. "I don't want to marry her. I never did." I stared at him. "Then why? Because it was arranged," he said. "Not officially, but practically. Our families have been friends for generations. Victoria and I have known each other since we were children. When I came back from college and started the business, it just seemed like the logical next step. Everyone expected it. So you proposed to someone you don't love because it was expected." "I was lost, Maggie," he said. "After you disappeared, after my family made it clear you weren't welcome anymore, I felt like I was just going through the motions of living. Victoria was safe, predictable. Being with her didn't hurt because I didn't really care. And now," he looked at me with those honey brown eyes that had haunted my dreams for 6 years. "Now I remember what it feels like to be alive. Now I remember what love actually is. And I know I can't marry someone I don't love when the person I do love is sitting right here in front of me." My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Your mother came to see me last night." His face darkened. "What did she say?" "That I'm destroying your family again. That I need to stay away from you or she'll make my life hell. She threatened my mother's job, Sebastian. She threatened the only stability we have." "That bitch," he said, and the venom in his voice surprised me. "I'm so sorry, Maggie. I had no idea she would do that. She also said you have obligations, commitments, that love is a luxury you can't afford." "My mother doesn't get to decide what I can and can't afford," he said. "And she sure as hell doesn't get to threaten you." "But she's right about one thing," I said. "I don't fit into your world. I never have. Victoria Sterling Beauregard is everything a society wife should be. Beautiful, connected, wealthy. I'm a college dropout who delivers food for a living. You think I care about any of that?" "I think you should," I said. "Because this isn't just about us anymore. It's about your business, your reputation, your future. Can you really throw all of that away for the fat girl from the trailer park?" He was off the couch and kneeling in front of me before I could finish the sentence, taking my hands in his. "Don't you ever call yourself that," he said fiercely. "Don't you ever reduce yourself to what other people think you are. You are brilliant and kind and beautiful and brave. And you are worth more than all of their money and connections combined. Seba's time, double quotes. I love you, he said. I never stopped loving you. These past few weeks, being with you again, remembering who I am when I'm with you, it's made me realize that I'd rather lose everything else than lose you again. What about? Victoria, I'm calling off the engagement, he said without hesitation. I should have done it the moment I saw you again. I should have done it years ago. And your mother. My mother will have to accept that I'm a grown man who makes his own decisions, he said. And if she can't accept that, then that's her loss. Wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But I'd learned not to trust in fairy tales. Not to believe that love could really conquer all. This is crazy, I said. We barely know each other anymore. We're not the same people we were at 17. You're right, he said. We're better. We're stronger. We know what it's like to lose each other. And we know we don't want to do it again. Your family will never accept me. Then I'll make a new family, he said. With you. I don't have money or connections or anything to offer you. You have yourself, he said. And that's all I've ever wanted. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and desperate, and I felt myself melting into him despite all my fears and doubts. Because this was Sebastian, my first love, my first everything. And being in his arms felt like coming home after years of being lost. Marry me, he whispered against my lips. I pulled back to stare at him. What? Marry me, he said again. I know it's crazy. I know we have a lot to figure out. But I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you. I don't want to waste any more time being afraid of what other people think. Sebastian, you're engaged to someone else. Not for long, he said. Give me 24 hours to clean up this mess, and then give me the rest of your life to prove that we can make this work. I looked into his eyes and saw the boy I'd fallen in love with at 16, the man he'd become, and the future we could build together if we were brave enough to try. And for the first time in 6 years, I decided to choose hope over fear. Yes, I whispered. Yes, yes, I'll marry you, you crazy man. He kissed me again, deeper this time, and I felt like I was 17 again, drunk on possibility and convinced that love could overcome anything. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Sebastian broke his engagement to Victoria, who responded with the kind of tantrum you'd expect from someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. His mother tried everything from guilt to bribery to threats to change his mind, but he stood firm. I'm marrying Magnolia, he told her when she showed up at his house demanding he reconsider. With or without your blessing. You'll regret this, she said coldly. She'll ruin you, just like she ruined everything else. The only thing I regret, he said, is listening to you 6 years ago when you convinced me to let her go. I won't make that mistake again. There was fallout, of course. Some of his business clients were uncomfortable with his choice to marry beneath his station. Some of his society friends stopped calling. Victoria's family threatened to ruin his reputation, though they ultimately decided it wasn't worth the scandal. But for every door that closed, another one opened. His grandmother's friends, the ones who remembered how happy he'd been with me in high school, rallied around us. His business actually grew as word spread about the successful young entrepreneur who'd chosen love over convenience. And slowly, even some of the people who'd initially been skeptical began to see what he saw in me. 6 months later, I'm standing in the same mansion where this all began, wearing a simple white dress that Mama and I found at a consignment shop, and altered ourselves. It's not the wedding Victoria had planned, with hundreds of guests and thousands of dollars in flowers. It's small and intimate, held in Sebastian's back garden with just our closest friends and family. Dame Broussard. My best friend from the trailer park is my maid of honor. Ruby May Thibodeau made my bouquet from her own garden. Mama is crying. Happy tears in the front row. Wearing the dress Sebastian bought her for the occasion because he said she deserved to feel beautiful on her daughter's wedding day. And Sebastian looks at me like I'm the most beautiful woman in the world. Like he can't believe his luck. Like he's been waiting his whole life for this moment. When the minister asks if there's anyone who objects to this union, Mrs. Beauregard stands up from her seat in the back row. My heart stops, waiting for her to destroy this perfect moment like she's destroyed so many others. But instead, she says, I do. I object to the fact that it took my son 6 years to realize what I've known all along, that Magnolia is the best thing that ever happened to this family, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. There's not a dry eye in the garden as she walks up to me and takes my hands. I'm sorry, she says quietly, for everything I put you through, for the years I stole from you both. You are my daughter now, and I promise to do better. When and I exchange vows, we promise to love each other through whatever life throws at us. We promise to choose each other every day, even when it's hard, even when the world tells us we don't make sense. We promise to build a life together based on love rather than obligation, on hope rather than fear. And when he kisses me and makes me his wife, I feel like the luckiest woman in the world. A year later, I'm finishing my degree at Tulane, studying journalism with a minor in social justice. Sebastian supports my dreams the way I support his, and we're building something beautiful together. We bought Mama a little house near ours, so she's close but independent, and her diabetes is under control thanks to the healthcare we can now afford. I'm still the same girl who used to deliver food in a beat-up Honda Civic, but now I'm also the woman who stood up for herself, who chose love over fear, who believed she deserved good things, even when everyone else told her she didn't. Subscribe if you believe in second chances, because sometimes love really can conquer all. Sometimes the delivery girl gets the prince. Sometimes the fat girl from the trailer park gets her happily ever after. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for it, love is exactly enough. Our story isn't over. We're talking about kids someday, about the babies we lost and the ones we hope to have. We're planning trips and dreams and a future that's bigger than either of us could have imagined alone. We're proving every day that love isn't about perfection or convenience, or meeting other people's expectations. Love is about seeing someone exactly as they are and choosing them anyway. It's about fighting for each other when the world tries to pull you apart. It's about believing that some things are worth the risk, worth the pain, worth the possibility of losing everything for the chance to gain everything. I never thought delivering a $20 jambalaya order would change my entire life, but it did, because sometimes the universe puts exactly what you need right in front of you, even when you're not looking for it. Sometimes a wrong turn leads you exactly where you're supposed to be, and sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, the boy you loved at 17 becomes the man you get to love for the rest of your life. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told you're not enough, if you've ever loved someone who seemed impossible to reach, then know this: you are worthy of love exactly as you are. You don't have to change or shrink or hide to deserve happiness. You just have to be brave enough to reach for it when it comes your way. Because love, real love, sees past the surface to the heart underneath. It doesn't care about your dress, size, or your bank account, or your family's reputation. It cares about your kindness, your strength, your capacity to make someone else's life better just by being in it. And that, more than any fairy tale ending, is the most beautiful truth of all. So here's to second chances, to choosing love over fear, and to the radical act of believing you deserve happiness. Here's to the delivery girls who become queens, to the boys who become men brave enough to fight for what matters, and to the love stories that remind us that sometimes, just sometimes, dreams really do come true. Like if you believe in love that conquers all, comment if you've ever had a second chance at happiness, and subscribe if you think everyone deserves their happily ever after, no matter where they started or how long it takes to find it, because in the end, we all deserve to be loved exactly as we are. We all deserve someone who looks at us like we're magic, who fights for us when the world says we're not worth it, who chooses us every single day, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get exactly that.